Don't challenge the expert. Story time, viewer edition. Story 1. My dad and I were once brought to a breakfast restaurant by an out-of-state friend of my dad's that we went to visit. This friend turned out to be a real braggart. He always did everything better than everyone. Anyway, the little restaurant had a special 2-pancake short stack or 3-pancake lumberjack stack made from pancakes that were so big nobody had ever eaten more than 2 of them. He was eager to show us that he knew where to find the best pancakes. The pancakes were served on a dinner platter. It wasn't even an eating challenge, just a menu item, but they were huge. The guy that brought us told me that he'd be impressed if I finished both. I looked at my dad, and he smiled. I had been dieting because I had started putting on weight due to my appetite, but at that moment we had an unspoken agreement. My dad wanted me to show what I could do. I ordered the lumberjack stack. The 3 huge pancakes showed up. They were the biggest pancakes I'd ever seen, over 1 inch thick, and I think 16 inches across. They looked like extra thick pizza crusts. My dad managed to eat 1 pancake. My dad's friend ate 1.5. Meanwhile, I ate 4 of them, and 6 eggs. I ate my 3 cakes, plus my dad's extra 1 and the 6 eggs. I had ordered eggs simply because I love eggs. I also drank 4 glasses of milk. The guy tried to explain how he could have eaten more, but blah, blah, blah. Eventually, he accepted my feat and was suitably impressed. Supposedly, according to my dad's friend, they offered a double stack as an eating challenge for a while after that. The way he described the challenge was 4 pancakes, 6 eggs, and 4 large milks. Exactly what I had that day. But the owner retired and closed the restaurant 2 years later, apparently with no winners to the eating challenge. I did, however, get her recipe for pancakes. The way this started off, I thought you were doing a story about Paul Bunyan. You ate all the pancakes and then you went out and chopped down trees in a single swing. But that's awesome. I don't like pancakes, but I respect that a lot. I'm a waffle or a French toast person myself. There's something about the texture with them. But, breakfast food in general is amazing, so I can hardly blame you. And, that does not sound like any small feat from the size you described. That's a lot. Story 2. Like a year ago, on a medieval fantasy reconstruction event, a guy clothed in traditional elven clothes, props to him for the costume, started to challenge everyone who was not in a costume to an archery duel, and after a few rounds, I stepped in. I was in a pair of floppy jeans and a baggy t-shirt, a guy looking like a complete nobody. He laughed, but in an elvish high manner, and proceeded to give me a bow and 3 arrows. Little did he know that I was doing archery of various styles from 6 years old. At the time I was 26, so 20 years. I took them, drew my usual style with 2 fingers, and shot the first arrow a distance of roughly 25 meters. Bullseye. Elf, visibly confused. Second shot. Lord of the Rings elven draw, moving target at 20 meters, pretty much bullseye. Elf, visible disbelief. Third shot. Stationary man-shaped target around 40 meters away, Avatar Na'vi draw style headshot. Elf, visibly afraid. Only now did he realize that I was the leading archer for the light side of the fantasy battle show that was going to begin in roughly 3 hours. He quietly kneels, puts his bow and quiver on the ground, and proceeds to ask for forgiveness in the most exquisite elven way possible. Again, props to him for staying in character, and boy, his speech style was beautiful. To which I throw off my baggy clothes and hat, under which were my own elven clothes, lift him up by his shoulders and say, well, the duel is not over. It's your turn. Show me what kind of recruits the great forest sends us. He did decent. I complimented his prowess for a self-taught, but after that he was even more attentive to the challenges he faced. I gotta wonder how you know it's traditional elven clothes. I guess if it's got kind of the big red hat and, a green jacket with some cookie crumbs on it. Boy, I sure do love those grasshoppers. They're delicious. No, I think that's really cool. It's pretty fun. I don't think I've ever been to an event like that, but I would definitely go. Not so much an elf person if you can't tell. More of a dwarf. Now, show me where your ale is. Story 3. This happened with my dad. My dad fought rapier in the SCA medieval recreation and was at a tournament. They had 2 Eric's rings, and you were in either Group 1 or Group 2. When he wasn't fighting, he was watching the other fights in his Eric, sizing up the people he was competing against. After a while, he had a pretty good idea of who he would be fighting in the final fight in his ring and how he could beat them, so he started watching the other ring between his fights, sizing up the people there to see who would be in the finals. By the end, he had a plan for the 2 people he could tell were going to be top in their ring. One of whom was a talented young cadet in his late 20s. Cadet and Don were like Squire and Knight, but for light weapons. Sure enough, the young guy tops his Eric and my dad tops his. Between the rounds and the final, the guy is going on about it. He can't believe the one he'll be fighting in the finals is some old guy, early 60s at the time, who doesn't even have a scarf. Cadets wear a red scarf, Dons wear white scarves. My dad handles the young man easily, and afterwards, the kid's Don is reprimanding him for not bothering to watch my dad fight or even ask any of the Dons if they know my dad. They all do, and have fought him many times. The only reason my dad isn't a cadet or even a Don is because he lives in the middle of nowhere, so he can't get to fight practice. It would be like a 4-hour drive each way to the closest fight practice. The next year, the same young guy won that tournament. By tradition, the previous winner does not compete. Story 4. Went to a local game store to check a few things out on my day off, parked right outside, and headed inside to see a gathering of Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, around 14 to 16 maybe. They were pretty much playing starter decks with some in between, some even had decks with some fake cards. Most of the Egyptian god cards with the anime appearances. As I sat down after having a look at some board games, I brought out my Yu-Gi-Oh! Dragon's Egg bag and thought I might play when the actual tournament starts in a few hours. One of the kids comes over and immediately starts acting like he's in the anime and he wants to duel, holding up his unprotected cards bound in a rubber band. As he's getting attention, a few of his friends start laughing and say I might not even know how to play, or if I did, it's an old deck like Elemental Heroes. Now I did start back in the Yu-Gi days, though they didn't know that I go to regionals and try to go to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series when I can. I lay down my mat and have a go. 3 minutes later, the kid is looking upset as I've set up a Buster Lock and he cannot use his effect monsters, nor his extra deck. After the relatively quick game, I got out a huge bag I had in my car just filled with cards I got in participation packs for tournaments. A year of weekly tournaments with 3 packs a tournament, 9 cards a pack, you end up with a lot of spare cards. I helped them to try to make their decks better and the way they wanted them to run. Even if they weren't the most polite at first, I wanted them to enjoy the game. It's no fun just getting thrashed over and over. I hope they're still either playing or enjoy the time they did play. Fun story, I actually used to play Yu-Gi-Oh! When it first came out. I was in high school and my girlfriend at the time, her younger brother, and I wanted, something to do to hang out at times, and so we started playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Together, and I don't really remember how to play it, but it's really cool that you helped those kids out and taught them. But I hope after you taught them, you still absolutely destroyed them. And then you cheated and they're like, what? You can't do that. That's against the rules. And then you're like, screw the rules. I have money. I hope someone gets that reference. Story 5. I was working towards a bachelor's degree in marine biology. I ended up not finishing my degree, but my knowledge of the subject still stands. I even work on research dives occasionally to take photo, video of, or tag sharks. And I've had to correct people's misconceptions about sharks a lot. Yes, I swim with sharks regularly. Yes, I have all of my limbs. And no, I will never be more afraid of sharks than of people. But the craziest story I have is when my father tried to correct me about how large white sharks are. I was saying that a white shark has a jaw diameter of about 1 meter and held up my hands for a visual comparison. My father, who was paying my college tuition, immediately told me I was wrong and that he's seen photos of people standing inside a shark jaw that was taller than them. I had to calmly explain to him that what he thought was a white shark jaw was actually the fossil of a prehistoric megalodon jaw. Also, if white sharks were big enough to swallow me whole and not even notice, I probably wouldn't be as inclined to swim with them. Story 6. My personal favorite story is the time I was working as a lift operator at a Pennsylvania ski resort and there were a bunch of punk kids in the terrain park area doing basic tricks. I've been snowboarding at this point in time for well over 15 years or so now. They get on the lift and are looking at my snowboarding boots on my feet. Usually we can ride during our shift with enough staff, making it easier to get from place to place. I hear something along the lines of, "That fogey probably can't ride and wears them for show." Me being only 27, I guess you could call me old now for snowboarding years, got super peed and was like, "Oh, just you wait and see." They're about ready to get off the lift, and at this point I grab my brand new park board I just got for the season and strap it on. I rode up the chairlift and the chair behind them. Eventually, I make it to the terrain park and yell, "Watch and learn." Park had some big jumps. I casually threw a 540 board grab spin off a big jump, then did a board slide into a 360 off a trail. And at that point, just hit some big/more difficult features. At the lift, I got a whole bunch of high fives and even a Coors Light from a random guy. Kids looked so defeated. Was eventually known as Local Boy from the shirt I was wearing at the time. They were calling you an old man. What did they say? That fogey? And you were 27? I'm almost 40. What am I in snowboarding years? Am I, decrepit? Do I even live in the snowboarding world, or am I but an ancient, withered skeleton? Story 7. I don't know if this counts, but I'm disabled and have a lot of medical conditions, and the amount of people who try to correct me on my own conditions and the information that I've had multiple specialists tell me that I've backed up with my own research seriously makes me facepalm. One of the worst was when I was telling one of my aunts about my Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's a connective tissue disorder and makes my joints more prone to dislocating on top of a few other things. And she asked if I had been tested for Lyme disease. She had it, and doctors insisted there was no Lyme in our state until they finally tested her after months and she came back positive. I told her that considering I've had genetic testing done and they found a literal mutation in my DNA that points towards my Ehlers-Danlos diagnosis, that no, it wasn't Lyme. She also tried to say that my seizures were from an eye condition when I've had multiple neurologists, including a specialist in my condition, say that it's a neurological condition. Yeah, I don't listen to her when it comes to medical advice. Story 8. One of my strangest skills is my way of judging object size and shape as well as organizing them, not on a macro scale, but moderate size. It has happened hundreds of times where people tell me, "This box won't fit, our car won't make it through there," or some variation. I worked retail, helped people move often, and somehow get into situations where this skill comes in handy fairly often. One time at a retail job, myself and a coworker were tasked with organizing and putting as much as possible away of a large furniture load. My coworker commented, "This is impossible. We'll be lucky to get half of this to fit in our allotted area in storage." I told him, "Here, hold this." As I pass him my tape measure, still unused, and proceed to single-handedly assemble a wall of furniture boxes within an inch of the shelving space we had, and end up having excess space. Afterwards, I turn to him, and his mouth is actually agape, and he just asks, "How did you do that?" I just responded, "I'm good at box truck Tetris." "How did you move those by yourself?" he asks as I retrieve my tape measure. "I'm really good at box truck Tetris." I laugh. Gotta have respect for anyone who's good at packing Tetris, whether it be with, boxes in a job, or I had to do some mighty good Tetris when I loaded up my car, which was a neon something or other. It was a little 4-door, and I fit all of my stuff in there. And let me tell you, there wasn't space for even a little T-bar Tetris piece. Crap, I almost forgot. It's not called a Tetris piece, they're called tetrominoes. I don't want anyone to call me out in the comments. I know that, and I didn't want to be a fool. Story 9. One time, my 10-year-old cousin challenged me in Smash and was saying I was trash and all that type of stuff. I asked him to 1v1 me, and needless to say, I demolished him, and then he cried and told his parents. I explained to his parents that he challenged me, and then walked away. Story 10. I don't remember this, but I've heard stories about it. When I was about 3, I went to a local geology museum. I was obsessed with dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures. There was the paleontology student giving presentations about certain creatures with their fossils. One time he said some sort of creature, and I corrected him because it had some sort of oral bone. He said I was incorrect. This was in public. and I continued to say that I was correct. There's just so happened to be a professor near this who stated that I was correct. Sometimes it's great to be a know-it-all. Story 11. Not exactly an expert, but it's one of my favorite high school memories. I went to a STEM school, and one of my science classes, we were debating the pros and cons of floating cities. I was on the pro side. When I pointed out that using a tether of some kind to anchor the city to the ocean floor would be better due to it being able to flex in a tsunami and not break as easily in an earthquake, one of the people I was debating against asked me how I went from tsunamis to earthquakes. I looked at her and said, "You do know that tsunamis are caused by underwater earthquakes, right?" I don't even remember if the debate continued after that. All I can remember is my science teacher walking to the front of the class, clapping with a smile on his face. Story 12. Was at a house party with two other buddies once, and we were bored, so we started sparring/fighting with each other in the front yard. After a few minutes, this guy comes out of the smoking circle nearby, introduces himself as Mason, and says, "The three of you versus the one of me." Well, we figured this was going to be simple since we had all studied martial arts and it was 3v1. Nope. This guy was like effing Goliath. Among other incredible feats, he single-handedly picked me and one of my buddies up and threw us in opposite directions at least twice. We each bailed after a few minutes. I learned an important lesson that evening. If someone is suggesting odds against their favor, they know something you probably don't. Useful lesson. Sounds like you faced like a pool shark, except it was for fighting, which, yeah, no, if someone's confident enough to be like, all three of you versus me, I will be like, maybe the two of them versus you, but I'm gonna bow out. Then again, I have no confidence on any number with including me versus someone because I'm not a fighter. Story 13. I was helping my nephew with his math homework. I'm a very big math nerd, and he was struggling. He took a test and, while did better, didn't do as good as I thought he should have. Going over the test with him, I realized the teacher made mistakes in marking, such as not giving method points because of the wrong method, i.e. not the method she uses when it was specified in the question. These would be methods that are decent tools for teaching newer students, but not really applicable when advancing. I believed in teaching the methods which would be expanded upon in later years of education, so my nephew wouldn't be caught off guard later. Not happy, I went to his school to pick him up one day to talk with the math teacher. We got into an argument, and the head of the department came over and took one look at me. I'd personally tutored them when we took A-level math back in the education years, and they knew I knew my math. The head of math remarked on his test, and he jumped up 2 grade levels. Turns out his math teacher didn't even know some of the methods I was teaching him, and despite him showing, working, and reaching the correct answer, didn't mark him as such. Story 14. Hello from Australia. I have something that sort of fits this category. Neighbor wants to uproot the original fence between our houses and replace it with a taller one. In Australia, if you want to build something involving someone else's property, your neighbors, the local council, and the bank, if you have a mortgage, needs to be notified and documents need to be reviewed and filled out. My dad, who had been a senior engineer for over 30 years at a local council, tells the neighbor about this, and the neighbor is surprised that there are a lot of regulations involved. My neighbor comes back a few weeks later. He's peed off, argues and swears at my dad, and is under the impression my dad is lying and thinks my dad doesn't want the fence replaced and says, "You're BSing me. Yeah, I get it. You love your fence." Mind you, my parents have been living in this suburb for a long time, and this guy's only been here a couple years. The neighbor comes back a few days later to apologize and finally admits to my dad, "You seem to know a lot about this stuff," to which my dad replies, "Yes, I've been dealing with issues like this for over 30 years at work." Man, I hope that at least then, you and that new neighbor or your dad and that new neighbor were able to get kind of friendly after that. I feel like, does it feel like these days as compared to like the 90s and stuff that like neighbors are just less friendly with each other now? Maybe it's because now I live in a city and I grew up in a small town where neighbors were way friendlier and stuff. And actually I'm pretty, I get along really well with all of my neighbors. Never mind, I guess it's just what I see on these stories. It seems like people don't get along with neighbors. Mine are great. Story 15. I wrote some process documents for a company I worked for on my own time, not their IP. niche industry, so documentation on the subject was scarce. A few years later, I'm sitting in an interview for a different company with the interviewer smugly and unknowingly quoting me as if it were some great gotcha. I corrected him by pointing him to the correct appendix in the document, from memory. He was shocked and angry, demanding to know if someone had tipped me off to their interview process, and how the hell did I get a hold of their proprietary documentation? I directed him to the name of the author and politely asked the same question. I've never seen someone's face go that red. I passed on the job, but told them they're welcome to contact me if they ever want to purchase the updated version of the document, LOL. They never did. Story 16. An amazing story from me. I've been doing dance since I was 2. Ballet, tap, modern jazz, and some street. So yeah, I'm pretty good with dance. My year, like 9, the dance teacher doesn't actually have a specific degree in ballet, just general dance and jazz, decided we were going to do ballet that term. At this point, I was on point and had been training at a professional dance school for 8 years or so. She was presenting a PowerPoint and explaining what the different parts of a pointe shoe were. It was all wrong. She had never been on point, and I can tell you, with those feet, she never will be unless she starts training for 5 to 6 years. But yeah, I pointed out it was wrong and she got all angry with me. I just so happened to have my pointe shoes with me that day because I had danced straight after school, so I took them out and the look on her face still cracks me up to this day. Story 17. My brother and I used to also play Mario Kart against each other and would constantly make time-saving shortcuts that could be applied to pretty much any map. We even looked at some professional races like Indy 500 and watched some of their weird track time-saving techniques. Mario Kart Tour rolls around and Nathan and I are so good against everyone else, it wasn't fun anymore. First place consistently, even on the highest CC. Now playing Mario Kart on a DS hurts my hands, so I don't do very much anymore, while Nathan has continued, and it shows every time we play together again. Being skilled at Mario Kart is an evil, evil thing. Because if you're good at Mario Kart and you play against everyone else, it is just the most frustrating for anyone else playing against you, because if we're all about the same level and we're playing Mario Kart and screwing up and everything, we're all laughing and having a good time probably. But if there's one person who's just doing really well, suddenly for the rest of us, it is infinitely more frustrating. Story 18. I answer a lot of questions on Quora, and the trouble is that there are jerks who imagine that because they've not heard of something, therefore it does not exist. The same person tried to school me twice on 2 different subjects. The first was when he did not know that the words Dominus Rex were commonly used in ancient Rome for the heads of any of the noble families. I eventually had to rub his nose in a dozen quotations from Martial. And the other when he tried to argue that ancient Greek artists actually knew perspective. I had to write out a small lesson on what perspective is, including a few sketches showing it at work and why the stuff he quoted from textbooks had nothing to do with it. Story 19. Had a bunch of college baseball players at a training facility I not only used to train at, but coached at as well. I used the facility to focus on my fundamentals on hitting and keeping my arm and stuff in shape, in the event I, at 31 years old, get discovered working my 9-to-5 by some crazy butt scout. What they didn't realize is that I was a 5-star recruit in high school for baseball, just didn't go anywhere with it due to personal decisions that ruined the opportunity for it. These kids were in there acting like God's gift to baseball and kept forcing the high schoolers that were there to give up the cages or the pitching mounds because college is more important than high school. I stepped in and told them, if you can get a hit off on me in 10 pitches apiece, I'll escort these high schools out of here myself. They laughed, said yes, and proceeded to look like 8-year-olds taking on a prime Sandy Koufax. Don't harass people in a facility designed to make you better when one of those people happens to be a coach in that facility. Absolutely hilarious reaction from them and the high school kids. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.